Hi everyone, here is summary of how emotions are made, The Secret Life of the Brain by Lisa Barrett. Introduction. Lisa Feldman Barrett's How Emotions Are Made presents a revolutionary perspective on the nature of emotions, challenging long-held beliefs about how our brains process and experience feelings. At the heart of Barrett's thesis is the theory of constructed emotion, which proposes that emotions are not innate, universal reactions but rather are constructed by our brains based on past experiences and cultural context. The book begins by dismantling the classical view of emotions, the idea that there are distinct, universal emotional categories hardwired into our brains. Barrett argues that this view, despite its widespread acceptance, is not supported by current scientific evidence. Instead, she introduces readers to a more nuanced understanding of how our brains create emotional experiences. Barrett explains that our brains are constantly making predictions about our environment and our internal states. These predictions are based on our past experiences and learned concepts, which she refers to as our emotion concepts. When we encounter a situation, our brain uses these concepts to construct an emotional experience that best fits the current context. A key aspect of Barrett's theory is the idea of interoception, our brain's ability to sense and regulate our body's internal state. She argues that our interpretation of these bodily sensations, combined with our learned emotion concepts in the current context, gives rise to our emotional experiences. The book delves into the neurobiological underpinnings of emotion, explaining how different brain networks work together to create our emotional experiences. Barrett introduces the concept of the body budget, our brain's way of regulating our body's energy use, and how it relates to our emotional states. Barrett also explores the cultural aspects of emotion, demonstrating how our emotional experiences can vary significantly across different cultures and even within a single culture over time. This challenges the notion of universal emotional expressions and highlights the role of learning and cultural context in shaping our emotional lives. The implications of Barrett's theory are far-reaching. She discusses how this new understanding of emotions can impact various fields, from psychology and neuroscience to law and medicine. For instance, it challenges the reliability of facial expressions as indicators of emotion, which has significant implications for areas like law enforcement and artificial intelligence. Throughout the book, Barrett provides practical insights on how we can use this new understanding of emotions to improve our lives. She suggests ways to expand our emotional granularity, our ability to distinguish between different emotional states, and how this can lead to better emotional regulation and overall well-being. In conclusion, How Emotions Are Made presents a compelling argument for a new way of understanding our emotional lives. By proposing that emotions are constructed rather than triggered, Barrett's work opens up new avenues for research and practical applications in numerous fields. Her theory encourages us to view our emotions not as reactions we can't control, but as experiences we can actively shape and influence. Part 1. Scientific Evidence Against the Classical View. Barrett dedicates a significant portion of her book to dismantling the classical view of emotions, which has dominated scientific thought for decades. This classical view posits that emotions are distinct, universal categories with specific neural circuits, triggered by external events, and expressed through unique facial expressions and physiological patterns. However, Barrett argues that accumulating scientific evidence fails to support this view. One of the primary pieces of evidence Barrett presents against the classical view is the lack of consistent neural fingerprints for specific emotions. According to the classical view, each emotion should activate a distinct pattern of brain activity. However, numerous neuroimaging studies have failed to find consistent, specific neural patterns for emotions like fear, anger, or happiness across different studies and individuals. For example, Barrett discusses a meta-analysis of neuroimaging studies on emotion. This analysis found that the amygdala, often thought to be the fear center of the brain, showed increased activity in only about 30% of fear studies. Moreover, the amygdala was also active during non-fear states, suggesting it's not a specific marker for fear. This lack of specificity challenges the idea of distinct neural circuits for each emotion. Another key piece of evidence comes from studies of facial expressions. The classical view, popularized by psychologist Paul Ekman, suggests that certain facial expressions are universal indicators of specific emotions. However, Barrett presents research that challenges this notion. For instance, she describes a study where participants from different cultures were asked to sort photos of facial expressions into emotional categories. While Western participants tended to categorize the expressions in line with Ekman's theories, participants from non-Western cultures often interpreted the expressions differently. Barrett also cites her own research, where she and her colleagues analyzed thousands of facial expressions in real-world situations. They found that people's facial movements varied considerably, even when experiencing the same emotion. For example, people who reported feeling afraid didn't always widen their eyes, the supposed universal expression of fear, and people who widened their eyes weren't always afraid. The book also explores evidence from physiology. The classical view suggests that each emotion has a distinct physiological signature. However, Barrett presents research showing that measures like heart rate, skin conductance, and hormone levels don't reliably distinguish between different emotions. For instance, an increased heart rate could indicate fear, excitement, or even physical exertion. A real-world example Barrett uses to illustrate this point is the case of elite athletes. These individuals often report feeling intense anxiety before a competition, yet their physiological responses, increased heart rate, sweating, are virtually identical to the responses they have when feeling excited or confident. This suggests that the body's physiological state alone doesn't determine the emotional experience. Barrett also discusses how language and culture shape our emotional experiences, which contradicts the classical view's assumption of universal, biologically determined emotions. She describes studies of remote cultures that lack words for certain emotions common in Western societies. For example, the Himba people of Namibia don't have a distinct word for fear separate from awe or respect. This suggests that our emotional categories are learned and culturally influenced, rather than innate and universal. In conclusion, Barrett presents a compelling array of scientific evidence that challenges the classical view of emotions. From neuroscience to cross-cultural studies, the data suggest that emotions are not fixed, universal categories with distinct neural, physiological, and behavioral signatures. Instead, they appear to be constructed by our brains based on past experiences, cultural learning, and current context. This new understanding of emotions has far-reaching implications for fields ranging from psychology and neuroscience to artificial intelligence and mental health treatment. Part 2, the theory of constructed emotion. At its heart, the theory of constructed emotion posits that emotions are not innate, universal reactions triggered by events in the world. Instead, they are constructions of the brain, created from more basic components. These components include bodily sensations, past experiences, and learned concepts about emotions that are shaped by our culture and personal history. Barrett argues that our brains are constantly making predictions about our environment and our internal states. These predictions are based on our past experiences and learned concepts, which she calls our emotion concepts. When we encounter a situation, our brain uses these concepts to construct an emotional experience that best fits the current context. To understand this better, let's consider a real-world example. Imagine you're walking alone at night and hear footsteps behind you. In this scenario, your brain might predict danger based on past experiences and cultural learning. It might increase your heart rate and tense your muscles in preparation for action. However, the emotion you experience isn't predetermined. Your brain might construct fear if that best matches your prediction and past experiences. But if you're someone who enjoys thrilling situations, your brain might construct excitement instead. The physical sensations might be similar, but the emotional experience is constructed based on your unique brain's predictions and interpretations. A key aspect of Barrett's theory is the concept of emotional granularity. This refers to a person's ability to construct and experience a wide variety of precisely differentiated emotions. People with high emotional granularity can distinguish between similar emotions, like frustration, anger, and contempt, and experience them as distinct states. Those with low granularity might lump these all together as simply feeling bad. Barrett provides an interesting real-world example of emotional granularity in action. She describes a study where wine experts and novices were asked to taste and describe different wines. The experts, with their more developed wine concepts, were able to discern and articulate subtle differences between the wines. Novices, lacking these fine-grained concepts, tended to describe the wines in simpler, more general terms. Barrett argues that our emotional experiences work similarly. The more developed our emotion concepts, the more nuanced our emotional experiences can be. Another crucial element of the theory of constructed emotion is the role of interoception, our brain's ability to sense and regulate our body's internal state. Barrett explains that our interpretation of these bodily sensations, combined with our learned emotion concepts and the current context, gives rise to our emotional experiences. For example, consider how the sensation of a racing heart might be interpreted differently in various contexts. During a first date, it might contribute to a feeling of excitement or attraction. Before a big presentation, it might be part of an experience of anxiety. After running to catch a bus, it might not factor into an emotional experience at all. The bodily sensation is similar, but the constructed emotion, or lack thereof, depends on the context and our learned concepts. Barrett also emphasizes the importance of culture in shaping our emotion concepts and, consequently, our emotional experiences. She cites research on cultures with emotion concepts that don't cleanly map onto Western categories. For instance, the German concept of Schadenfreude, pleasure derived from another's misfortune, or the Japanese concept of ame, the feeling of pleasant dependence on another person, don't have direct equivalents in English. According to Barrett's theory, individuals from these cultures can construct and experience these emotions in a way that others might not, simply because they have these concepts available to them. The theory of constructed emotion has significant implications for how we understand and manage our emotional lives. If emotions are constructed by our brains rather than triggered by external events, it suggests we have more control over our emotional experiences than previously thought. Barrett argues that by expanding our emotion concepts, improving our emotional granularity, and becoming more aware of our interoceptive sensations, we can gain greater control over our emotional lives. For instance, she describes how teaching children a wider vocabulary for emotions can help them regulate their emotions better. A child who can distinguish between feeling angry, frustrated, disappointed, and hurt is better equipped to understand and manage their emotional state than one who only knows they feel bad. In conclusion, Barrett's theory of constructed emotion presents emotions not as fixed, universal reactions, but as flexible constructions of our predictive brains. This theory challenges us to rethink our understanding of emotional experiences and offers new avenues for emotional regulation and well-being. Part 3: The Interoceptive Network and Your Brain's Predictions. The concept of interoception and its crucial role in our emotional experiences. The interoceptive network and the brain's predictions form a fundamental part of her theory of constructed emotion. Let's explore this topic in detail, with some real-world examples to illustrate the key points. Interoception refers to our brain's ability to sense and interpret signals from within our body. This includes sensations like hunger, thirst, temperature, pain, and even subtler signals like heart rate, breathing rate, and muscle tension. Barrett argues that this interoceptive network is fundamental to our emotional experiences. According to Barrett, our brain is constantly making predictions about our body's needs and the state of the world around us. These predictions are based on past experiences and are aimed at keeping our body in balance, a state she calls allostasis. The brain uses these predictions to regulate our body's systems preemptively, rather than just reacting to changes as they occur. For example, imagine you're about to give a public speech. Your brain, based on past experiences, might predict that you'll need extra energy and alertness. As a result, it might increase your heart rate, breathing rate, and blood glucose levels before you even step on stage. These bodily changes, which you experience through interoception, contribute to what you might label as nervousness or excitement. Barrett introduces the concept of the body budget to explain how the brain manages our body's resources. Just like a financial budget, the body budget involves predicting future needs and allocating resources accordingly. When the body budget is in balance, we generally feel good. When it's out of balance, we might experience this as fatigue, stress, or various emotional states. A real-world example of this is the phenomenon of hangry feeling irritable or angry when hungry. From the perspective of the interoceptive network and predictive processing, here's what might be happening. 1. Your blood glucose levels start to drop. 2. Your interoceptive network detects this change. 3. Your brain predicts that you need food and starts to mobilize resources, like releasing stored glucose. 4. You might feel some physical sensations, like a growling stomach or lightheadedness. 5. In the context of these bodily sensations and your current situation, your brain constructs an emotional experience, in this case, irritability or anger. The hanger isn't a direct result of low blood sugar, but a construction based on your brain's predictions, bodily sensations, and contextual factors. Barrett also explains how the predictive nature of the brain can lead to self-fulfilling prophecies in our emotional lives. If your brain consistently predicts that social situations will be threatening, it might repeatedly put your body in a state of high alert in social contexts. You experience this bodily state through interoception, which in turn reinforces your brain's prediction that social situations are threatening. This cycle can contribute to conditions like social anxiety. An interesting real-world application of this understanding is found in the treatment of panic disorders. Traditional views saw panic attacks as emotions unleashed. However, from the perspective of interoception and predictive processing, panic attacks can be understood as extreme misinterpretations of normal bodily sensations. For instance, a person with panic disorder might interpret a slight increase in heart rate, a normal bodily fluctuation, as the beginning of a heart attack. This interpretation leads to fear, which causes more bodily arousal, creating a feedback loop that results in a full-blown panic attack. Treatment approaches based on this understanding focus on helping individuals reinterpret their interoceptive signals and change their brain's predictions. Barrett also discusses how our interoceptive abilities can vary from person to person. Some individuals are more attuned to their internal bodily states than others. This variability in interoceptive sensitivity can influence how we experience emotions and even our overall emotional granularity. For example, studies have shown that people with higher interoceptive sensitivity, as measured by tasks like accurately counting their own heartbeats, tend to experience emotions more intensely. They might also be better at distinguishing between different emotional states because they have more detailed information about their bodily states to work with. Understanding the role of the interoceptive network in the brain's predictions has practical implications for emotional well-being. Barrett suggests that practices like mindfulness meditation, which increase our awareness of our bodily states, can help us become more adept at regulating our emotions. By becoming more aware of our interoceptive signals and the predictions our brain is making, we can potentially intervene in the emotion construction process and have more control over our emotional experiences. In conclusion, Barrett's exploration of the interoceptive network and the brain's predictions offers a profound reimagining of how we experience emotions. By viewing emotions as constructions based on our brain's predictions and our awareness of our bodily states, we gain a new perspective on emotional experiences and new avenues for managing our emotional lives. Part 4: Affective Valence and Arousal. The concepts of affective valence and arousal as fundamental components of our emotional experiences. These concepts are crucial to understanding her theory of constructed emotion. Let's delve into these ideas in detail, along with some real-world examples to illustrate their significance. Affective valence refers to the pleasant or unpleasant quality of an experience. It's essentially how good or bad something feels. Arousal, on the other hand, refers to the level of activation or intensity of an experience. Barrett argues that these two dimensions form the basic building blocks of our emotional experiences. According to Barrett, our brain is constantly creating affective feelings, simple sensations of pleasure or displeasure, with some degree of arousal. These core effects are not emotions in themselves, but rather the raw materials from which our brain constructs more complex emotional experiences. To understand this better, imagine a two-dimensional space. The horizontal axis represents valence, ranging from extremely unpleasant on the left to extremely pleasant on the right. The vertical axis represents arousal, ranging from low activation at the bottom to high activation at the top. Any emotional experience can be plotted somewhere in this space. For example, consider the following scenarios. 1. High arousal, positive valence. You've just won a competition you've been preparing for all year. You feel elated, your heart is racing, and you can't stop smiling. This might be constructed as intense joy or excitement. 2. High arousal, negative valence. You're stuck in terrible traffic and late for an important meeting. Your muscles are tense, you're sweating, and you feel awful. This might be constructed as frustration or anger. 3. Low arousal, positive valence. You're relaxing in a warm bath after a long day. Your muscles are relaxed, your breathing is slow, and you feel good. This might be constructed as contentment or serenity. 4. Low arousal, negative valence. You've just received some disappointing news. You feel sluggish, your movements are slow, and you feel unpleasant. This might be constructed as sadness or disappointment. Barrett argues that these core effects of valence and arousal are then interpreted by our brain based on our past experiences, current context, and cultural concepts to construct more specific emotional experiences. A real-world example that Barrett discusses is the case of a man with severe panic disorder. This man would experience intense episodes of what he labeled as fear. He had racing thoughts, difficulty breathing, and felt an overwhelming sense of doom. From the perspective of valence and arousal, we can understand this as an experience of high arousal and negative valence. The interesting part of this case is what happened when the man started taking a medication that reduced his physiological arousal. His experiences changed dramatically. He still had moments where he felt unpleasant, negative valence, but without the high arousal, he no longer constructed these experiences as fear. Instead, he described feeling disappointed or discouraged. This case illustrates how changes in core effect can lead to very different emotional constructions. Barrett also discusses how individual differences in sensitivity to valence and arousal can influence our emotional experiences. Some people are more attuned to variations in valence, while others are more sensitive to changes in arousal. This can lead to differences in how people experience and label their emotions. For instance, two people might have a similar physiological response to a situation, say, increased heart rate and sweating before giving a presentation, but construct different emotions based on their sensitivity to valence and arousal. One person, more attuned to the high arousal, might label the experience as anxiety. Another, more focused on the slightly positive valence of anticipation, might label it as excitement. Understanding effective valence and arousal can have practical applications in emotional regulation. Barrett suggests that by becoming more aware of these core effects, we can gain more control over our emotional experiences. For example, if you're feeling unpleasantly high arousal, which might be constructed as anxiety, you could try to reduce arousal through deep breathing or other relaxation techniques. Alternatively, you could try to shift the valence to be more positive, perhaps by reframing the situation in a more optimistic light. This understanding also has implications for how we interpret and respond to others' emotions. Barrett argues that facial expressions, often thought to be universal signals of specific emotions, are actually just indications of valence and arousal. A furrowed brow and tense muscles might indicate negative valence and high arousal, but this could be constructed as anger, concentration, confusion, or any number of other states depending on the context. In conclusion, Barrett's exploration of effective valence and arousal provides a nuanced understanding of the basic components of our emotional experiences. By viewing emotions as constructions built from these core effects, rather than as fixed, universal categories, we gain new insights into the nature of our emotional lives and new tools for managing our emotional experiences. Part 5. Emotions and Cultural Concepts. The topic is a crucial component of her theory of constructed emotion, highlighting how our cultural background influences the way we experience, express, and understand emotions. Let's delve into this fascinating aspect of Barrett's work, exploring it in detail with some real-world examples. Barrett argues that emotions are not universal, hardwired reactions, but rather socially constructed concepts that vary across cultures. Our emotional experiences are shaped by the emotion concepts we learn from our cultural environment. These concepts act as a lens through which we interpret our physiological sensations and the world around us. One of the most striking examples Barrett uses to illustrate this point is the concept of ligat among the Ilongit people of the Philippines. Ligat is often translated as anger, but it encompasses a much broader range of experiences than what Western cultures typically associate with anger. It includes feelings of energy, enthusiasm, and even joy. For the Ilongit, ligat is a positive force that motivates social bonding and productive action. This concept doesn't have a direct equivalent in many Western cultures, where anger is typically seen as a negative emotion to be controlled or suppressed. Another fascinating example is the German concept of Schadenfreude, which refers to the pleasure derived from someone else's misfortune. While people from other cultures might experience similar feelings, having a specific word for this emotion makes it more salient and easily recognizable for German speakers. This illustrates how language and cultural concepts can shape our emotional experiences by providing us with specific categories to organize our feelings. Barrett also discusses how cultural differences in emotion concepts can lead to misunderstandings and cross-cultural interactions. For instance, she describes research on facial expressions across cultures. While Western cultures often associate a smile with happiness, in some East Asian cultures, smiling can be a way to mask negative emotions in social situations. This cultural difference in the meaning of smiles can lead to misinterpretations in cross-cultural communications. The book also explores how emotion concepts can change within a culture over time. Barrett provides the example of neurasthenia, a diagnostic category popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries in the United States. This condition, characterized by fatigue, anxiety, and depressed mood, was widely recognized and discussed at the time. However, as cultural understandings of mental health evolved, this concept fell out of use, replaced by more specific diagnoses like depression and anxiety disorders. This example shows how our cultural concepts of emotions and mental states can shift over time, influencing how we experience and categorize our feelings. Barrett also discusses how different cultures have varying levels of emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between similar emotions with precision. For example, the Utka Eskimos have many words for different types of fear related to their Arctic environment, allowing them to construct and experience these as distinct emotional states. In contrast, cultures with fewer fear-related concepts might lump these experiences together as general fear. An interesting real-world application of this understanding is in the field of emotion research itself. Barrett points out that much of the early research on emotions was conducted in Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, weird, societies. When researchers began studying emotions in other cultures, they often tried to map Western emotion concepts onto other cultures' experiences. This approach missed the unique emotion concepts that existed in those cultures, leading to an incomplete understanding of human emotional experiences. Barrett also explores how cultural emotion concepts influence not just our subjective experiences, but also our physiological responses. She describes research showing that Chinese participants showed different patterns of physiological arousal when thinking about their mothers compared to American participants. The researchers attributed this to different cultural concepts of family and filial piety. Understanding the cultural nature of emotions has practical implications in various fields. In mental health, for instance, it suggests that effective treatment might need to take into account a person's cultural background and the emotion concepts they've learned. In business, it highlights the importance of cultural intelligence in global interactions, where misunderstandings about emotional expressions could lead to communication breakdowns. Barrett's work on emotions and cultural concepts challenges us to think more critically about our own emotional experiences. It suggests that by learning about different cultural emotion concepts, we might expand our own emotional vocabulary and experiences. For instance, learning about the Japanese concept of yugen, a profound, mysterious sense of the beauty of the universe, might allow us to construct and experience this emotion in our own lives. In conclusion, Barrett's exploration of emotions and cultural concepts provides a compelling argument for the constructed nature of our emotional experiences. By highlighting how different cultures conceptualize emotions in unique ways, she demonstrates the flexibility and diversity of human emotional life. This understanding opens up new avenues for personal growth, cross-cultural communication, and scientific research into the nature of human emotions. Part 6. Learning begins at birth and never stops. The topic is a crucial aspect of her theory of constructed emotion, highlighting how we continuously develop and refine our emotional concepts from infancy through adulthood. Let's explore this concept in detail, with real-world examples to illustrate its significance. Barrett argues that from the moment we're born, our brains begin the process of learning about the world around us, including the complex landscape of emotions. This learning process is not just about identifying and labeling emotions, but about constructing the very concepts of emotions themselves. When infants are born, they don't have discrete emotions like adults do. Instead, they experience what Barrett calls simple feelings of pleasure or discomfort, calmness or agitation. Over time, through interactions with caregivers and exposure to their cultural environment, infants begin to differentiate these basic affects into more specific emotional experiences. For example, consider a newborn who feels discomfort. At first, this might just be a general unpleasant sensation. But as the baby interacts with caregivers, they begin to associate certain patterns of facial expressions, vocalizations, and behaviors with relief from this discomfort. Over time, the baby learns to construct more specific emotional experiences from this general effect, perhaps distinguishing between hunger, fatigue, and the need for a diaper change. Barrett describes research showing that even very young infants are sensitive to the emotional expressions of those around them. In one study, 3-month-old infants were shown happy and sad facial expressions. The infants looked longer at the expressions that matched the emotional tone of voice they heard simultaneously. This suggests that even at this young age, babies are beginning to form associations between facial expressions, vocal tones, and emotional states. As children grow older, their emotion concepts become more refined and culturally specific. Barrett cites research showing that children's ability to recognize and label emotions improves dramatically between the ages of 2 and 5. This coincides with rapid language development, supporting the idea that language plays a crucial role in shaping our emotion concepts. A real-world example of this is how children learn to distinguish between similar emotions. A young child might initially use the word mad to describe any unpleasant feeling. Over time, through interactions with others and exposure to stories, media, and everyday situations, they learn to differentiate between being mad, frustrated, disappointed, and other related emotions. This increasing emotional granularity allows for more nuanced emotional experiences and better emotion regulation. Barrett emphasizes that this learning process doesn't stop in childhood. Adults continue to refine and expand their emotion concepts throughout their lives. She provides an interesting example from her own research. Adults who underwent a brief training program to learn new emotion words showed changes in their perception of facial expressions. After learning new emotion concepts, they were able to perceive emotional nuances in faces that they couldn't distinguish before. This ongoing learning is particularly evident when people encounter new cultures. Barrett describes how people who move to a new country often go through a process of emotional acculturation, learning new emotion concepts specific to their new cultural context. For instance, a person moving from a Western country to Japan might need to learn the concept of a feeling of sweet dependence on someone, which doesn't have a direct equivalent in many Western cultures. The book also explores how our emotion concepts can change in response to major life events or societal shifts. For example, the COVID-19 pandemic introduced many people to new emotional experiences, like the complex mix of anxiety, boredom, and uncertainty that some termed pandemic fatigue. This illustrates how we can develop new emotion concepts in response to novel situations, even as adults. Barrett argues that understanding the learned nature of emotions has important implications for emotional intelligence and well-being. If emotions are learned, then we have the power to expand our emotional vocabulary and experiences throughout our lives. She suggests that practices like reading widely, experiencing art, and engaging with diverse cultures can all contribute to richer, more nuanced emotional lives. This perspective also has implications for parenting and education. If emotional learning begins at birth and never stops, then providing children with rich, varied emotional experiences and language can set the stage for greater emotional intelligence later in life. For instance, parents who use a wide range of emotion words when talking to their children tend to have children with better emotion regulation skills. In conclusion, Barrett's exploration of lifelong emotional learning challenges the idea that emotions are fixed, innate reactions. Instead, she presents a view of emotional life as a continual process of learning, refinement, and construction. This perspective empowers us to actively shape our emotional experiences and understandings throughout our lives, opening up new possibilities for personal growth and emotional well-being. Part 7, Conclusion. While the classical view of emotion believes that emotions are innate in humans since birth, new science and research prove this to be untrue. Instead, emotions are a reality that is constructed through our experiences and culture. Infants, for instance, aren't necessarily born with emotions like awe and disgust. Instead, our basic emotions are pleasant, unpleasant, calm, and agitated. We can see this in infants as they either cry out of anger or calmly observe the world around them. It isn't until our experiences and language teach us about other emotions like anger, disgust, and surprise, that we begin to construct our own ideas and beliefs about feelings. In fact, we construct these ideas throughout our lives and we never stop. Luckily, as we experience new experiences, we begin to better identify our emotions and become well-rounded individuals. In the end, Dr. Barrett asks that you open your minds and construct a new reality about emotions. She states, like most important paradigm shifts in science, this one has the potential to transform our health, our laws, and who we are. Thank you for listening. I hope this content is useful to you. If you like this kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel to support our team.